Okay. Michael, you're up.
All right. Good afternoon from the United States. This is to our international viewers. Very late good evening or very early good morning. I suppose that for some reason you cannot sleep and decided to join our Authentication Focus Group update webinar for some late night or early morning activity. My name is Michael North, co-chair of the Authentication Focus Group, or as we call it, the AFG. The AFG works on a collaborative project which includes members of ELUNA, IGeLU, and Ex Libris. The AFG is tasked with assessing, researching, and making recommendations stemming from the need to change the authentication process into Alma, namely the removal of passwords from within Alma for security purposes. This webinar is a Where We Are Now webinar. We hope to share the hard work that we have been doing over the past 7 months and to share our plans moving forward. As we continue with this webinar, feel free to enter questions in the YouTube chat box. I think you may need to log in order to type the questions. We will answer the questions towards the end of the presentation after the FAQ section. Our presenters for this webinar are Josh Wiseman of Ex Libris and myself. John is the VP of Development at Ex Libris and has worked very closely with the AFG as our work has progressed. I am from Northwestern University, co-chair of the AFG, and I am representing the ELUNA Steering Committee. Unfortunately, Mark Demlow, also the co-chair of the AFG and from the University of Notre Dame, and representing the ELUNA Steering Committee, was suddenly unavailable for this afternoon's webinar, so I will try to do my best to cover his speaking areas. I'm not sure how good I can do this, but I will try. For those of you who know Mark, you know he has no problem speaking or singing for that matter. This is our agenda for today. We will quickly discuss some background information and share how we got here and what were the driving forces that led to the formation of the AFG. We will share some of the collaborative work that we've done so far in the form of surveys and possible solution research. We will cover some issues relating to identity and access management that have requirements that impact possible authentication solutions for Alma customers. Then we will look at what work still lies ahead. To give some background to the AFG formation and work, we'll start with Josh to give some Ex Libris perspectives on the issues impacting Alma authentication. Then I will give some perspectives from the Alma customer's point of view. Go ahead, Josh.
Great, thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, this evening, and this morning. I'd like to start off with a little bit of background from the Ex Libris side. As many of you are aware, we are vigilant and constantly working on improving the security of our cloud products, of Alma and of Primo. We are constantly looking for ways to make sure that our systems are hardened and are following best practices and industry standards. And as a part of it, we are in several continual processes to work with certifying bodies to maintain our certifications and to apply for new security-related certifications. And as a part of that process, we took a look at industry standards and best practices and came to the realization that we wanted to leave authentication functionality to systems for whom authentication is their primary focus and primary piece of functionality, and so that we can focus on providing library software, which is our core competency. And so as a part of doing that, we looked at internal passwords that are stored inside of Alma and used for authentication purposes, and started a process or started thinking about how we could work with the community to encourage use of other authentication protocols and leave that work to the systems for whom that is their core competency. So as a part of doing that, we've been working with the focus group for the past several months. We've introduced some new authentication protocols and integrations. And as a part of this presentation, this webinar today, we will present and review some of those new features that have been added. I will say that as a part of the survey, which Michael will talk more about momentarily, we learned that the majority of institutions do have some kind of institutional identity provider, institutional identity management system. And so our focus for this effort has been to understand what use case the internal users and internal authentication serves. Use cases, for example, community borrowers, walk-ins, alumni, etc., which for some reason may not be served by an institutional or a university identity management system, and to try to work with the community to find ways to provide authentication for those types of users outside of Alma. And so that's the group that we're focused on. Of course, there are some institutions that might not have as a provider, and so we're looking at ways to provide additional options for them too. But our main focus has been those institutions who have some percentage of users who are not served by the university or institutional identity provider, and how to provide additional options for those users to authenticate. We'll talk about some more of those options as we proceed.
Thank you, Josh. As preliminary discussions occurred last year with Ex Libris on the topic of Alma authentication, it became apparent that there was potentially some major changes that were going to occur that would have significant impact on Alma institutions. As always, when there is change, there can be unease and uncertainty. As we began to hear increasing concerns, we approached Ex Libris last fall at ELUNA and asked about setting up a collaborative assessment initiative to evaluate and communicate this situation. The Authentication Focus Group was born out of these talks. Its function was to assess the current authentication situation, evaluate feasible and potential solutions, evaluate the ramifications of these potential solutions on both institutions and library workflows, and most importantly, to communicate the process of this work so that there would be transparency. So we started looking at the identity access management industry to find what solutions were out there. We ran surveys on our customer base to collect the concerns from institutions on the impact of these changes and to find out what requirements were placed upon customers by their parent institutions and departments. There turned out to be many issues unrelated to technology that makes the transition to a new authentication system for Alma very difficult, even if you knew what the solution would be. First, there were issues with university policy, what can or cannot be implemented using third-party vendor solutions as an example. Then we came across financial constraints. We realized that not every institution had the ability to ingest the financial cost of implementing a new IAM methodology. And even if they did, it sometimes took long-term planning to release those funds. So there was no quick solutions here. Not all institutions had appropriate manpower to implement new solutions. This could refer to the number of available staff or the number of qualified technical people available to work on the project. Then there was timing. When do you do the work? When could it be scheduled? As we all know, universities are not overly flexible in making these commitments, and they are often planned out years in advance. So we found ourselves balancing the perspectives of three entities: Ex Libris, institutions, and Alma customers, i.e. the libraries. This slide shows the current members of the AFG. As I mentioned earlier, the AFG got started last fall shortly after the ELUNA conference following discussions about changing the Alma authentication for internal patrons. The AFG has good representation of both ELUNA and ELUNA members, consisting of Mark Demelo and I as co-chairs, Paul Joseph, David Allen, Betsy Friesen, Mehmet Selik, and Alan Jones. Ex Libris works closely with the AFG with regular meetings with Bar, Dever, and Josh in attendance. Our collaborative work relies heavily on community surveys to collect this information. Our first survey, with 193 respondents, was designed to assess the potential impact on the user community resulting from the removal of passwords in Alma for internal patrons. The survey has been published to the Alma community and is also available on the ELUNA and IGeLU websites. We had a second survey which collected information about the existing institutional identity management systems that are currently in place. This helps us in determining standards and requirements. Our third survey, which will be out later this summer, will share what potential solutions that Ex Libris and the AFG have determined are potential solutions so far, and then assess the ability of institutions to implement those proposed options. Throughout this entire process, we continue to review and evaluate third-party external authentication systems. It is said that before you can figure out how you want to get to where you want to go, you need to know where you are, and that applied to this project. We needed to review our current situation and assess our current identity management environment, sort of a get the lay of the land process. So first, we looked at the technical needs of Alma access management and the different ways it was being currently met. We looked at external versus internal user authentication, local or vendor versus institutional authentication, as well as the overall requirements of various institutional identity management systems. In reviewing types of ID management, we found institutional centralized systems like LDAP and CAS. We also found institutions that had no central ID system being used with Alma, whereby all of the patrons, the tens of thousands even, were internal users with passwords stored inside of Alma. Then we reviewed social media authentication, looked at the different types of social media products and the policies associated with their use. We also found a number of institutions who felt, okay, this is an okay system, but it can't be the only alternative available because large numbers of people do not use social media, especially older community borrowers and alumni. We're also looking at existing identity as a provider services, IAAP, such as Azure and Auth0. And finally, we're looking at the new kid on the block, which is passwordless authentication, which holds a lot of promise. In the technical review of Alma authentication requirements, we found that it broke down into three focus areas. We had institutional requirements, solution features, and additional considerations. This is kind of a busy slide, so I won't read all the stuff that's on it, because in reality, there are many more requirements than are listed here, but these are designed to give you a feel for what we came up with. The three areas we assessed were complex in that there was a broad range of things to look at. Institutional requirements range from very strict requirements to loosey-goosey. Some institutions had no guidance provided when dealing with community guest users. This included spouses and guest faculty having institutional ID cards, but no institutional ID number, with access to institutional services such as the library, but not allowed in the central ID system. So it got kind of complex. Solution features were guided by the needs of the institution and the libraries. Some newer features didn't fare very well. Multi-factor authentication sometimes was deemed as onerous and complex by some, and social media authentication was looked upon with distrust by others. I know that in the case of Northwestern, those are both true. Because of the broad range of institutional types and sizes involved, the area of additional considerations was also complex and numerous. Lots of features and ease of use to patrons can be contradictory at times. Next, we needed to review the existing institutional authentication systems being used by the libraries in order to evaluate the impact of the Alma authentication change. The relationship between the institutional libraries and institutional central IT department that handles the authentication issues was very complicated. The biggest difference was in how non-institutional patron accounts were handled by the institution. Some had a local method of handling authentication of these patrons, some had none at all. When dealing with people that were not registered with the institutional central authentication system, some Alma institutions had very few internal users registered in Alma with internal passwords, and some institutions had tens of thousands or all of their patrons in Alma with passwords. This makes finding a solution very difficult. Definitely there is not a one-size-fits-all solution available. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Josh to talk about some other aspects of our review process.
So I'd like to start by agreeing with Michael that there definitely is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And part of our close work with the focus group over the past couple months has been to identify additional possible integration authentication options to provide universities and institutions with alternatives for that subset of users who can't be authenticated using the university or the institutional identity management system. Again, that's our goal, that's our focus, is to identify additional methods of authentication to help institutions move away from internal passwords inside of Alma and to provide additional options that might provide a solution for those types of users. And so in working with the focus group, we identified a few possibilities and have worked over the previous months to implement some of them. And we're still in the process of evaluating and implementing additional options. The first one I'd like to discuss is social network authentication. So many of you are probably familiar with login with your social network. You'll see around the web, log in with your Facebook, log in with your Google, log in with your Twitter account. It provides, for those who have such accounts, it provides an easy way of authenticating against a service like Primo without having to create an additional username and password, without having to manage an additional password. And many people are familiar with this type of login. It uses a protocol called OAuth 2.0. And we've implemented it in Primo for Facebook, for Google, and for Twitter. And the way that it works in general is that the university can activate the login via social network for one or more of these social network providers. And then in Primo, there is a button that says login with your social network, your social credentials. The user would click on that, select the social network that they're interested in using, log in, or if they're already logged in, authorize the library to have access to their public profile information, which just means first name, last name, email address. And then from that point on, the user's social media, a social network account can be used to authenticate and to gain access to Primo, to their library services inside of Primo. The only information that is passed from the social network to the library, to Alma or Primo, is the public profile information, so that's name and email address. And there is absolutely no information that is passed from Alma to the social network. So there's no flow of information from the library to the social network. So again, this is a comfortable option for some subset of users. Of course, this will not be enough, or not be an option for some group of users who are not comfortable with it, or who do not have a social network account. But we do have some institutions who have implemented this in production or in the process of implementing this. And again, it can be a valid option for a certain subset of these users, community borrowers, or graduates, etc. So that's one option that we've been exploring, social login via social network. The next option is to provide, next slide please, to provide integration with a commercial or identity as a service. And so we've been looking at a few of those types of providers. Essentially, it's outsourcing the authentication features to another system. So some of the ones we've looked into are here on this slide: Microsoft Azure Active Directory, Auth0, OneLogin, and other options as well. And the idea there is that the users would be managed inside of Alma as internal users, but their passwords would be managed in some kind of identity as a service system. So it would essentially be creating an additional identity provider in addition to the university or institutional identity provider. So of course this can be done today with Alma by manually managing the users in some external system and then authenticating via an existing protocol like SAML. What we've been looking in Alma and some of these systems, which will allow seamless synchronization of the accounts. So you would use the user management screens inside of Alma, and then Alma would go ahead and push the brief user details to one of these systems, and then you would set up an authentication integration with these systems, and the patrons or Alma staff could log in using one of these systems. We have a pilot running today with that type of integration with Microsoft Azure Active Directory. Several institutions have created accounts in Azure Active Directory and have activated the integration from Alma so that you use the Alma user management screens to manage those users, and Alma pushes the user information to Azure, and then Azure is used to authenticate. So this is another option that we have considered for institutions, either for those community borrowers or those walk-in users, ones who cannot be authenticated with the university system, or for those few institutions who don't have any university or institutional identity provider. This is another possibility as well. And then the third additional authentication option that we've been working on over the past couple months, on the next slide, is something called passwordless or login via email. And this is again targeted to those graduates or community borrowers. And the idea here is that the university could activate this login methodology. In Primo, you would see a button that says login via email. A user would enter their registered email address, and then the user would receive an email to that address with a magic link. That magic link could be used to log into Primo. So the user would then click on that link, and they would automatically be logged in and could receive library services. This is another common practice in the industry. You may have seen this in other sites. The links are usually expire after a certain period of time. So the next day or the next week, if the user comes back and wants to log in again, they can click on the same button, and a new email with a new fresh link will be emailed. And they can click on that and again gain access to Primo. So this has been developed and is being rolled out hopefully in the next month release, Alma release, in the June release, and that's for patrons via Primo. And then what we have, based on feedback that we received in our cooperation with the Authentication Focus Group, we have committed to making that available as an option for Alma staff to log in as well. So either as a backup option, or for those users, again, who are not able to be authenticated through any other university system, they could use this to log in as Alma as well. We're working on providing a target date for that functionality. So again, this login via email feature will be rolled out next month and available for patrons to log into Primo, and then down the road to log into Alma as well. And this it's available for those on the Primo new UI. So if you're interested in this feature, it does work on the Primo new UI. So that's the third additional authentication option that we've added over the past couple of months.
Thank you, Josh. I was just going to go back one slide and make a comment about Auth0. we here at Northwestern successfully tested a Alma authentication using Auth0 yesterday in a test environment. So things are looking good on that front. Another option. Okay, so now we move forward. What's up for the summer and beyond? The next thing that we will be doing is completing a requirements matrix where we will combine the user needs and requirements that we determined by the results of the first survey and the various product features of vendor external authentication services. Then we will present an assessment survey, our third survey, to the user community, showing the various options and their features and matching them to various requirements. The goal of this survey will be to see how institutions feel about the various options and how they either meet or not meet their needs. We plan on suggesting a range of solutions that will take into account various institution sizes and complexities. Then after this survey is completed and we get all the results and we hash through those, the AFG will review the results and determine additional steps to be taken on behalf of the user community. We thought we would take this opportunity to present some of the most common questions that we have come across during this process and produce an FAQ page. In a moment, we will address any questions that attendees have put in the chat box during this presentation, and those questions will also be added to the FAQ section of this document before it's released to the ELUNA and EGLU user communities. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Josh for the FAQ.
Okay, so we've jotted down a number of questions that we've received over the past couple months, so we're working together. I figured we'd go through those questions we received in advance, and then as additional questions come in through the chat, we can address those questions as well. So first, is there a timeline for the eventual end of using passwords in Alma? One of the main purposes of our collaboration with the Authentication Focus Group is to arrive jointly at a timeline which helps us meet our goal of adhering to industry best practices, but is also reasonable for the customer community to be able to implement them to help us towards that goal. And so we're working together with the focus group on a date that's acceptable, and we will communicate that target date jointly at the end of this process. We have already committed, of course, to give plenty of lead time for any changes which require action on the part of the user community. Question about whether or what other products this impacts. So our goal is to take Alma out of the authentication picture. So that means that that Primo working against Alma will be affected, as well as a new offering of Summon over Alma, which we're in the process of rolling out as an offering as well. So either of those two Alma will be affected by this change as well. We've also received questions about what kind of support Ex Libris will be providing for this process. And our goal, as you see from the investment that we've made and the additional options we presented in the previous slides, our goal is to make sure that there are enough options available to cover most institutions' needs. In addition, we've invested in migration tools and bulk management tools that can be used to migrate or to switch over from internally managed passwords in Alma to some of these other options. So for example, Alma now supports a bulk tool to invite a certain set of users to activate login with social network, social network credentials. So a university, for example, could create a set of users who are, again, not managed in the institutional identity management system, graduates and community borrowers, and do a bulk email to all of those users, inviting them to use social network login to authenticate with Primo. So that's an example of a tool that we're using to help with the migration. And we're committed to making both enough options to cover institutions' needs and also to provide tools to allow or to ease the migration process to some of these new options. On the next slide, we have a number of additional questions. Is Ex Libris trying to eliminate the use of internal users in Alma? So we believe that internal users is a critical piece of functionality inside of Alma. We have no intention of removing that feature. Internal users can be used for staff, for other users who are not managed by the institutional identity management system, and we intend to continue to support the use of internal users. We're only talking here about authenticating those users. So we want to remove the passwords from Alma, not the users themselves. And all the options that I've outlined in the previous slide, integration with an identity, integration with the social network, again via email, all of those options use internal users in Alma. So there's no intention of removing that feature from Alma. And then finally, is there a public roadmap available for all of these authentication options? And the answer is that that will be one of the outcomes of our final work with the Authentication Focus Group. Once we made our joint decisions about what options will be available, we'll be sure to make sure that the community has all the information about what those options are and the rollout timeframe for those options. So this will be made available once our work with the focus group has come to a conclusion.
Thank you, Josh. At this time, we can take a look at any questions that have come in through the chat box. I know one question that I received was about documentation for the Auth0 integration, and we'll be writing up what we've learned about using Auth0 and making it available at a later date. We still got a lot of work to do, but the intention is at the end it will be available to everybody. Anybody aware of any other questions? Okay, since there are no other questions, we will continue with the presentation. If you think of a question in the next 10 minutes or so, write them up, submit them, we'll go ahead and answer them. Like all good technology people, we love our acronyms, but not everyone shares this love, and so we thought we would identify some of the ones that we use in this presentation and in the process of the AFG work. Of course, AFG, which refers to the Authentication Focus Group, we refer to that when we are discussing the collaborative efforts of this project. IAM refers to Identity and Access Management. IAAP is Identity as a Provider, a vendor who provides identity services. In this case, we've mentioned Azure and Auth0. The short version of Auth for authentication, which is different than authorization. Authentication most often refers to usernames and passwords, as Josh has talked about before earlier. That is authentication. Authorization refers to what you are authorized to do once you're allowed in or authenticated into an application. This gets kind of confusing since some people use authentication and authorization interchangeably by accident. So LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which is used very commonly at many institutions. as a directory for personnel information. Have CAS for the Central Authentication Service, which is also used at various institutions. OAuth, Open Standard for Authorization, used by many social media services, as Josh mentioned. I'm looking to see. All right, so I want to say thank you to all of today's attendees, both near and far. I also want to thank the members of the AFG and Ex Libris who have worked hard over the past 7 months to get to where we are today, and so that we could share our progress today. It has been a lot of work, and it is appreciated. This project shows a perfect example of a vendor working with the user community to address an issue that affects everyone to the benefit of everyone. Next week is the ELUNA conference, and I hope that many of you will be attending. The work of the AFG and Ex Libris will be the topic of meetings between the ELUNA Steering Committee and Ex Libris Executive Management. If there are any follow-up questions that you think of later, please get a hold of myself, Mark, or Josh, or any member of the AFG. We will get you an answer as soon as possible. Stay tuned for future updates this summer as our work progresses, and be sure to participate in the 3rd survey, which will be coming out soon. This YouTube show and tell presentation, I believe, has been recorded and will be available for your viewing pleasure when you feel a need to see it again or to share it with a friend. Popcorn and Coke is optional. On behalf of Ex Libris and the ELUNA IGeLU AFG, I want to thank you for attending this webinar. Thank you.